Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today we're going to be ranking every single Bravado vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online in tier list form. Now if you've never seen one of my tier list videos, there is something that you must know. This list is 100% factual and cannot be argued with. If you disagree, you are simply wrong, and you must accept that fact or exit off of the video immediately. If you accept these terms and conditions, we can move on, and we will. With that being said, let's get started with F tier. To start off with, the worst Bravado car in Grand Theft Auto Online is of course the Buffalo. Now the Buffalo is just mid. The Buffalo is just underwhelming in pretty much every possible metric. There's like no customization, the performance is not that great. Now I must say that the Bravado Buffalo is actually not that horrible of a car. Like this thing is actually pretty good. There's definitely cars that are worse than it, but it's just underwhelming, you know? It feels like a car that could have had so much more potential, but it just never got it. So that's why the Buffalo is the car that starts off F tier as the worst Bravado car in Grand Theft Auto Online, although technically there's definitely some worse cars. So let's move on to the next one. Next up in F tier we have the Bravado Dune Loader. Now the Dune Loader is kind of a cool vehicle, but it's really slow and really pretty much pathetic in every single way. It's kind of a good off-road vehicle, which is cool, but other than that, there's really nothing notable about the Dune Loader. The only thing that this thing can do that is a little bit cool is use the snorkel on it, and this thing can go almost all the way underwater. As you guys can see, the Dune Loader can go underwater. So that's pretty much everything notable with the Dune Loader. That's why it's the second worst Bravado vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online, although there probably are some worse ones realistically, but the Dune Loader is another one that's kind of like the Buffalo in that it's just kind of underwhelming and it's just really not that special, unfortunately. Next up, we have the Bravado Paradise. This is basically a glorified Rumpo. Yeah, it's a glorified Rumpo. It can seat 4 players. It's absolutely piss slow, but it does have this kind of cool graphic on it, which, you know, that's all right. The Paradise is very average. Let's just say that. That's it for the Paradise. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up in F tier, we have the Bravado Rat Truck. Now this thing is, well, not my favorite, I'll be honest. The handling is somewhere in between piss poor and god awful. It's just an absolutely abhorrent handling vehicle. It is within the muscle category, so that kind of figures, I guess. Now this thing is a little bit cool. It's kind of fast in a straight line, like kind of, like really kind of. Other than that, there's really nothing notable. It's kind of a neat vehicle. The interior is pretty sick. That's really it. That's it for the Bravado Rat Truck. On to the next one. Next up, for the final vehicle of F tier, we have the Bravado Rumpo. Now the Rumpo, don't get me wrong, this thing is a goat. Definitely one of the best cars ever to grace Grand Theft Auto Online with its presence. Truly, it is one of the vehicles that can almost think about rivaling the Canis Seminole, but it's just not quite there. The Rumpo is pretty sick. You can have some friends in the back that can shoot out of the back, which is pretty tight. I think the Paradise can do that too, but we don't talk about that. And of course, the Rumpo is just a stone cold killer. One color. There's no livery on this thing. It means business. And the Rumpo just knows what it is, you know what I'm saying? So that's why the Rumpo is at the end of F tier. This is the best vehicle in F tier by far. Anyway guys, with that being said, it's time to move on to B tier. To start off B tier, we have the Bravado Yuga. Now the Yuga is pretty much the Rumpo, but just a little bit cooler because of one feature. That feature is, of course, you can have friends sitting in the back seat of the Yuga, and the back doors slide open and allow you to shoot machine guns out of them, which is really, really cool. Other than that, the Yuga is pretty much entirely useless and is worse than the Rumpo in every way, I've decided. Still a cool vehicle because you can shoot machine guns out of it. Other than that, not really that cool. So that's it for the Yuga. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Bravado Bison. Now the Bison is based off of a Ram 1500 in real life, which, I mean, I think everybody knows that. And the reason that this thing is not in F tier is because it has a very, very cool feature that not many cars in GTA have these days. I say these days, but this thing was released back when the game came out in 2013. Anyway, it's fine. This thing is actually a 6-seater. Now this means that 2 players can sit on those 2 boxes in the rear of this thing, which is pretty cool. And of course you can have 4 players sitting up front. This thing is a 6-seater, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. On top of that, the Bravado Bison, when you fully upgrade this thing, is actually a pretty fast vehicle, albeit in a straight line. When it comes to handling, the Bravado Bison is a little bit useless, but then again, it is a pickup truck, not exactly designed to be a race car. Although Ram 1500 drivers in real life seem to definitely think that their truck is a race truck, but that's besides the point. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up in B tier, we have the Bravado Gresley. Now the Bravado Gresley is honestly one of my favorite Bravado vehicles in the entire game, but because of its performance, I just couldn't rank it any higher than B tier. Now the Gresley is super cool because it does actually have a little bit of customization that can be done to it, which does help to make this thing a little bit more unique. On top of that, the Gresley is not as slow as you would necessarily expect it to be, making it a little bit more fun to drive than you would expect. However, it's still nowhere near the top of the SUVs category, and it doesn't have the craziest customization or performance in general, so therefore I could only rank it in B tier. Still, great vehicle, and I would definitely recommend trying to get one of these things if you guys do not have one already. The Bravado Gresley is a super cool car. That's it for the Gresley. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Now to cap off B tier, we actually have the Bravado Rat Loader, but I was not able to find one. Unfortunately, I cannot show you it. It's basically the Rat Truck, but with garbage on the back of it. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is kind of cool because it's really rare to spawn. I actually have a video on how to spawn it if you guys are interested. There is a picture on screen right now that you guys will be able to see. So that's the Rat Loader, and it is at the top of B tier. Let's move on to C tier. To start off C tier, we of course have the Bravado Yuga Classic. Now the Yuga Classic is kind of cool. It's basically the same as the Bravado Yuga in that you can have players in the back of it shooting machine guns out of the side because these side doors do of course slide back. The Yuga also has a pretty decent amount of customization. It's pretty slow, but it's still a pretty cool vehicle, and it's definitely a classic looking vehicle, that's for sure. I really like how this thing looks. Definitely not the best performer, but it is definitely a really cool looking vehicle. Anyway guys, that is it for the Bravado Yuga to start off C tier. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Bravado Yuga Classic 4x4. Now, this thing is a lot cooler than the regular Yuga Classic, but it's like also at the same time not like that much cooler, so that's why they're both in C tier. The Yuga Classic 4x4 is a little bit more capable than the regular Yuga Classic, obviously when it comes to off-roading. This thing does have much better ground clearance, and it is overall a much better vehicle. I do think that it is actually a little bit faster than the regular Yuga Classic as well, so that's just another added bonus. Overall, really cool vehicle, definitely one to pick up if you guys do not have one already. Next up in C tier, we of course have the Bravado Gauntlet. Now the Gauntlet is a pretty classic muscle car in Grand Theft Auto Online. Obviously this thing has been out the entire time that the game has been out, and it's just an awesome vehicle. This thing handles super good, especially out of the muscle cars that released with the game. The Bravado Gauntlet definitely handles the best out of all of them. I really like how this thing drives, definitely one of my favorite muscle cars in the game, definitely also one of my favorite OG cars in Grand Theft Auto Online. The Gauntlet is just classic, it's so awesome. Definitely one to pick up if you guys have never tried one out. The only problem with this thing, and the reason that it's so low down in this tier list, is because it has absolutely zero customization with the exception of paint and rims. So that really sucks, but it is still a really fun car to drive. Definitely one of the better handling muscle cars even to this day in Grand Theft Auto Online. That's it for the Gauntlet. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the next logical choice, which is of course the Redwood Gauntlet. Now this thing has very slightly upgraded performance over the regular Gauntlet in Grand Theft Auto Online. Most of the time you will not notice a difference because it is very minute, so it's probably not going to make much of a difference. Now the Redwood Gauntlet basically does everything that the Gauntlet does, just like a tiny bit better. It's a good car, definitely one that I would recommend picking up if you guys don't have one. However, this is a lot more expensive than the regular Gauntlet, so if you're looking to get either of them, I would definitely say go for the regular Gauntlet just to save yourself some money unless you're absolutely balling. That is pretty much it for the Redwood Gauntlet. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up in C tier, we of course have the Bravado Buffalo S. And it's definitely one of the more customizable vehicles on this list so far. The Buffalo S is what the Bravado Buffalo should have been in my opinion. I really don't know why they made the regular Buffalo and then also made the Buffalo S. Like, it's cool to have two different trim options, I guess. The Bravado Buffalo could have just been the Buffalo S, and they could have spent their time making a different car in Grand Theft Auto Online that we could enjoy, instead of having like 3 different versions of the Buffalo now. Now the Bravado Buffalo S is in the sports category, so it's not actually a muscle car unlike the Bravado Buffalo Stx, which is pretty interesting. This thing kind of sucks when it comes to the sports category because there are so many fast cars, and it would have been much more at home in the muscle car category in my opinion, but Rockstar had their reasons I guess and put this thing into the sports category. Overall, the Bravado Buffalo S is still a really nice car, definitely one that I would recommend, and it costs less than $100,000, so it's definitely a pretty good bargain. Anyway guys, that is it for the Bravado Buffalo S. Let's move on to the next vehicle. And finally, to cap off C tier, we of course have the Bravado Rumpo Custom. Now the Rumpo, like I said, is a great vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online, and the Rumpo Custom just takes the Rumpo and makes it that little bit better. This is basically the off-road edition of the Bravado Rumpo. On top of that, this is also the fastest vehicle in the vans category in all of Grand Theft Auto Online, which in itself means that this thing gets at least a buy into C tier. The Bravado Rumpo Custom is one of my favorite Bravado vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online, believe it or not. I actually love driving this thing. It handles shockingly well for what it is. Of course, on that corner it didn't do that, but it gets a lot of grip, which is really nice, and it's honestly pretty quick. On top of that, it's the Rumpo Custom, so it's a much better off-road vehicle than the regular Rumpo, which is just another added bonus. Anyway guys, that is it for the Bravado Rumpo Custom, and that is it for C tier. Let's move on to A tier. To start off A tier, we of course have the Bravado Buffalo S Sprunk Edition. Now this thing is basically a tiny bit faster than the regular Bravado Buffalo S. This thing is basically like the Gauntlet Redwood, but for the Bravado Buffalo S instead. Just a tiny bit quicker, not really enough to make much of a difference. Everything that's good about the Bravado Buffalo S is the same with this car, it's just a tiny bit quicker. Overall, it's a pretty cool vehicle, but you still will not win any races with this thing. Because of course, it's in the sports category and it's been out for some years now, and there's just much faster sports cars. So that's it for the Bravado Buffalo S. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Bravado Gauntlet Classic. Now this thing is an awesome vehicle. Great muscle car in Grand Theft Auto Online, has tons and tons of customization, handles pretty decently for what it is, and of course being it is a muscle car, it is of course pretty good in a straight line. The Gauntlet Classic is definitely one of my favorite Bravado vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. This thing is awesome in every single way. There's really nothing to complain about with it, the only thing is that it doesn't have the greatest handling ever, but that's kind of to be expected because of course it is a muscle car. So that's it for the Bravado Gauntlet Classic. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Bravado Banshee. Now this is of course an OG sports car in Grand Theft Auto Online, and it goes for about $130,000, which is a pretty fair price all things considered. This thing is one of the faster vehicles on this list so far because of course it is in the sports category. And if you're on the expanded and enhanced edition of Grand Theft Auto Online, then you can get the HSW variant of this vehicle, which makes it insanely quick. It handles great, it accelerates well, it's got a decent top speed. Overall, there's nothing to complain about with the Banshee. This thing is absolutely awesome in every single way. The only thing that I wish the Banshee had more of was customization options. Now it still has a decent amount, but it could be better, I'll be honest. But still, it is a great car, and everybody should own a Banshee in Grand Theft Auto Online. So that's it for the Banshee. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Bravado Gauntlet Classic Custom. Now this thing is basically the Gauntlet Classic, but just upgraded and a Benny's Edition vehicle. So it has way more upgrades. You can customize the interior, you can customize everything that you could customize on the Bravado Gauntlet Classic, but you can just do it more. On top of that, this is one of the only cars in Grand Theft Auto Online where the wheelie bar really works, and it works really well on this thing. You can get a really good launch with this vehicle. On top of that, I do believe personally that this thing handles quite a bit better than the regular Gauntlet Classic, so that's just another added bonus with this thing. On top of that, it's also just an awesome looking vehicle, obviously being based heavily off of the Charger Daytona, which is a sick vehicle. Overall, the Bravado Gauntlet Classic Custom is definitely the one to get out of the two. Definitely make your Gauntlet Classic into the custom variant because it's just so much better and so much cooler looking. Anyway guys, that is it for the Bravado Gauntlet Classic Custom. We have one more vehicle in A tier, and then it's time to move on to S tier. And for the final vehicle in A tier, we of course have the Sasquatch. Now the Sasquatch is a Bravado vehicle, believe it or not. And I'm not going to rank the different variants of it, the Future Shock, the Apocalyptic, and the other one. I'm just going to go with this one that I have right now, because they're all about the same and they all pretty much do the same thing. Now, the Sasquatch is a really fun vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online. I actually love this thing. You can upgrade it to have a big huge ramp on the front of it, which you can use to bash anything in your way out of your way. It's a huge vehicle. It's basically a glorified monster truck, except it's kind of better than any of the other monster trucks in Grand Theft Auto Online. Definitely more fun and definitely a great vehicle to have. If you guys don't have a Sasquatch or you've never seen it before, I would highly recommend picking one of these things up because it's just so awesome. Anyway, like I said, this is it for A tier. It's time to move on to the big boys in S tier. So let's get into it. To start off S tier, we of course have the Bravado Banshee 900R. Now the 900R is basically the Banshee but taken into Benny's and upgraded into a supercar, and it's got all kinds of crazy customization. The Banshee 900R is one of my favorite Bravado vehicles that I own in Grand Theft Auto Online, and is definitely one of the best in the entire game. Now the 900R is a lot faster than the regular Banshee, albeit that's without the HSW upgrade considered, because if you do have the HSW upgrade, then the regular Banshee will be quite a lot faster than the 900R. The Banshee 900R is a hugely customizable vehicle and is definitely one of the more fun ones in Grand Theft Auto Online, especially under the Bravado manufacturer. So if you don't have a Bravado Banshee 900R, you should definitely go and pick one of these things up. It's awesome to customize, it's awesome to drive, and it's a really fun car to drift as well. That's it for the 900R. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Bravado. It's time to make fun of me again, my German friends. Furli-Ra, I think is how you actually say the word, but for those of you who don't want to pronounce it like that, it's the Bravado Verlierer, which sounds ridiculous, so I'm going to go with the German pronunciation of it. Now, this car goes for about $700,000. It is in the sports category. It has a tiny bit of customization, but it is a really fun car to drive. This thing handles amazingly well. It also sounds incredibly cool, as you guys will be able to hear right now. This vehicle is pretty awesome. Definitely one of my favorite Bravado vehicles as well, hence it being in S tier, of course. It handles well, it accelerates well, it has a pretty okay top speed for what it is, it feels very light, and it's a very small vehicle, which makes it very maneuverable and quite agile. For $700,000, you really cannot go wrong with this vehicle. I do truly love this thing, and I honestly don't get to drive it enough, or as much as I would like to. Such an awesome car. Definitely pick one of these things up if you do not have one already, or if you've never owned one in Grand Theft Auto Online. Next up, we have one of the most fun vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online, which is of course the Bravado Gauntlet Hellfire. This thing for $735,000 is a vehicle that I honestly feel like you cannot go wrong with owning. Now, the only problem with the Gauntlet Hellfire, and I say problem in terms of racing, is of course this thing handles absolutely awfully. But that's not exactly a disadvantage, because in free mode, that makes this car really fun. And of course it is a muscle car, so it's not exactly expected that this thing is going to be the pinnacle of automotive genius and the pinnacle of automotive handling. The Gauntlet Hellfire is a blast to drive in free mode. I absolutely love this vehicle. It looks super good, there's tons of customization that you can do to it. It's fun to drive, it sounds pretty good. What's not to like about the Bravado Gauntlet Hellfire? For all of these reasons, it's in S tier, of course. This thing is absolutely awesome. Definitely pick one of these things up if you do not have one already. Let's be honest, I think pretty much everybody's got one of these, and if you don't, you definitely need to own one. So that's it for the Hellfire. Let's move on to the next vehicle. Next up, we have the Bravado Half-Track. Now, the Half-Track is one of the best armored vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. It's also a complete blast to drive, and by that I don't mean that it's fast to drive, I just mean it's very capable. You can climb up pretty much any hill in Grand Theft Auto Online using this thing, because of course it is half-tracked, hence the name half-track. I probably don't need to explain it, to be honest. On top of that, this thing is also equipped with the dual AA gun on the back of it, which is extremely good for taking out players and aerial targets as well as ground targets. You can't go wrong with it there either. And of course the gun on the back is also able to be upgraded into a quad cannon, which is a lot better than just two, so that's pretty awesome. Now, another really good feature about the Half-Track is, of course, this is one of the only vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online that the front windshield is completely bulletproof. This means you can literally not be killed from the front in this vehicle by any weapon that any player has. Doesn't matter if they shoot with a heavy sniper right in between the armor plating here, it will not kill you. It will not do any damage to you, because the front of this thing is completely bulletproof. Now, the sides are a different story. You can be killed right through the armor plating on the sides, unfortunately, but at the same time, for balance reasons, I can totally understand this. although I'm sure that the windshield was probably a glitch and not intended to actually be like that. Now this vehicle is a bit slow, but what it lacks in speed it makes up for in armoredness. This thing can take 27 Oppressor Mark II missiles, which means it can survive against an entire Mark II before they have to go back and rearm the thing. Overall, the Bravado Half-Track is one of the best Bravado vehicles in Grand Theft Auto Online. You really cannot go wrong with owning one of these. It's definitely a personal favorite of mine, and for some extra options, of course, it does have a proximity mine dropper on it, and it's also got this roller on the front that you can use to bash other vehicles out of your way. Overall, the Half-Track is awesome, and it's definitely a vehicle that everybody should own in Grand Theft Auto Online because it truly is one of the best armored vehicles out there. Anyway guys, that is it for the second best Bravado vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online. It's time to move on to the number 1 best Bravado vehicle. The number 1 best Bravado vehicle in Grand Theft Auto Online is of course the Bravado Buffalo Stx. Now the STX is great for so many different reasons. I'm going to start off with the performance of this thing. It is within the muscle cars category, and it is by far the best muscle car for circuit racing in Grand Theft Auto Online. This thing is absolutely flying through the muscle cars category. There is no muscle car that can really keep up with this thing as long as there's a good driver in both vehicles. Now the STX is an awesome vehicle for free mode as well because it can of course seat 4 players, and this is only the start of the good things with this vehicle. Now I'm sure many of you do know everything about the Bravado Buffalo Stx, but this is for those of you who don't. The STX is also equipable with proximity mines that you can drop behind this thing. It's also equipable with front-mounted machine guns that do a ton of damage. You can destroy cars really easily with these things, which is pretty awesome. On top of that, it's also got an armor upgrade. Like you guys can see, I've got equipped on my Bravado Buffalo Stx right now. This will allow this vehicle to take 6 to 8 rockets depending on what vehicle is shooting the rockets at you, so that's another great feature. But truly the best feature about the Bravado Buffalo Stx is that if you have the Imani Tech Workshop within your agency, you can equip this thing with either a remote control device, which allows you to remotely control the car, shocking I know, or of course the missile lock-on jammer. This will allow your car to not be locked onto by any sort of tracking missiles in Grand Theft Auto Online. Now this is a huge advantage that only some of the Imani Tech cars in Grand Theft Auto Online have, as well as some other ones, but nothing that you can get access to like you can with the Imani Tech cars. The Bravado Buffalo Stx is the best car in Grand Theft Auto Online that has Imani Tech equipped on it, technically in terms of performance, but also in terms of capability. This thing is awesome and is definitely a vehicle that I recommend picking up more so than any other vehicle on this entire list. I'm sure many of you guys saw this coming at number 1, and I think it's pretty obvious that the Bravado Buffalo Stx just is that good of a vehicle. Anyway guys, there you have it. That has been the ultimate Bravado vehicle tier list in Grand Theft Auto Online. If you guys enjoyed this video, if you learned something, a like is of course appreciated, if not dislike. Subscribe if you guys are new, and I will see you all in the next video. Until then, take care. Peace.